like the fact that every so often Arizona sticks it to the federal government, which is it's a good thing. It engages some level of humility back on the East Coast, not much, a little bit. And good luck to all the Sun Devils as they go on their next athletic endeavors. The whole idea of creativity is generating new arrangements of things that possibly everybody's familiar with. I'm hired a lot to figure out how to keep the cue stable and then add something over the top of it. The future is interesting because we're fed the future one day at a time. The future is a phenomenon in time, linear time. Will people come back to us from the future? Our ends, possibly. But the future is a phenomenon that is always there ahead of us, one day at a time, and yet we have to plan. Mortgages, car payments. You've just signed up for 4 years on that little tin box you're driving. So it's a whole enterprise of manipulating your belief system to think that yes, it can happen. And I'm going to be there when it does. Now, we all begin about the same way, actually. It's been going on for a long, long time. And I want you to sort of gear up your thumb twitch mechanism because we're going to go fast. We don't have much time, and lunch is waiting somewhere on campus. We're all adorable when we're young. This is my first picture I drew when I was 3. By the time I was 6, I was doing things like this. And if you see the little circles there, I knew I was going to be a designer because I put stops so the cars wouldn't roll off the car carrier. My first experimentation with the transportation and building models. And my first paying job, 19 years old, I was paid to be character origination and backgrounds for an animation company. So I've been being paid to be creative for 66 years. Everything I do, in my mind, starts with a story. These are stories. Each rendering or illustration that you see you could write a story about the situation, what's happening, whether it's in the future, whether it's in the past, whether it's iconic or mysterious. There's a story here, and stories take place in worlds. Now, hopefully, the story and the world sort of match. If they don't, you have a sloppily crafted narrative, or perhaps that mismatch is the actual reason for the story world compilation in the first place. So the world in which the story takes place is important because it establishes a belief system temporarily. You suspend your belief, and that's very important in fantasy and the work that I do, which essentially is inventing the future of stuff. Transportation is stuff, my first love. How we get from A to B. During the course of human history, you can pinpoint pretty much what the technological level of an era was by how people got from A to B. First on foot, then they rode beasts, then we had beasts carry or pull things for us, carriages, and when self-mobility came along, the automobile, we were on a whole other tear on how to get from A to B, and it's still, of course, going on. What I strive for when I'm working on a project for a client is to assume that maybe I'll achieve future-proof. This car design was done in 1963. So we start in the present or near future. Car design is an incredibly complex and expensive, very high-risk enterprise that is entered into around the world by companies that spend billions of dollars inventing their own future. Success and failure depends on a wide variety of public motivation, and if it doesn't work, you have a failure. Fantasy is different than prediction in my mind. Fantasy has no rules. You can make up your own as you go along. And you combine story, the world in which the story is happening, and the stuff that's in that world, and you end up with a cohesive view or a little peek into perhaps a possible future world. And that's what I'm hired to do most often. Is this a future anti-gravity Corvette? Perhaps. The movie industry is a storytelling device. The movies are to storytelling what the symphony orchestra is to music. It's the most elaborate way that we tell stories to each other. It's sort of a variation of theatrical presentation, stage and so forth. And movies that were never made. Hollywood churns out a lot of scripts, thousands go through per day. And a lot of movies are never made, and I've worked on them, pre-production. This one was called The Core. It was made with another director. Peter Hyams had a dust-up with Paramount. I don't know what that was about. But these are my sketches for the interior of this machine that was going to go down into the earth and travel through solid rock at 85 miles an hour. Isn't that fantastic? That's what you can do in movies. You can create this imaginary, fantastic engineering accomplishment and then go ahead and make sets and make this elaborate story of something that perhaps is completely impossible. This was the interior of this machine, and it was meant to be sort of, let's call it a submarine picture, where the interior is very cramped, and that accentuates the danger and the closeness and the threat of the whole thing failing completely. The front end, the idea was to combine lasers, sonic boom, wave fronts, and then, you know, you're on your way. This is the back end. This is a side view. They were going to build a 97-foot-long, one side only. You're going to photograph it, you're not going to drive it, for the final prop for the film. Peter Hyams elected not to finish the film. Paramount had another director. And so The Core, with my designs, was never done. Universal has, of course, the movie industry. They also have a huge game industry. In my mind, the electronic games, because of the high resolution, 64-bit, I've worked in games since 4-bit days. That's a long time ago. Remember sprites? 8 of them to make a rotation? This was a franchise expansion of the Cylon franchise that Universal happens to own. This was the Cylon's base in deep space. This was the entrance slot. And if your telemetry agreed, then you were allowed to the inner entrance. And inside, all the venues were elaborately rendered. We had to invent what the Cylons saw in terms of robotic vision. And perhaps a real version of what the interior... All the angles around the edges of these views of the interior are parallel to the various sides, 7-sided polygon, my favorite shape. Remember the Jetsons? Wasn't that fun? I mean, completely silly, but lots of fun. Well, they were going to do a live-action CG combination feature. Rob Minkoff came to the house. He started his career big time with Lion King, directed both of the Stuart Little movies. How a Little Mouse Can Be a Hero. Oh, fantastic story. So I was designing the sets and the go-ahead for the Jetsons. This was Craterville, where the Jetsons lived and moved to Orbit City. Wonderful. And their car at the drive-in in Orbit City, picking up an Orbit burger, I suppose. And the apartment. Rob said, I want the interior, they're in Orbit City now, they've been a serious upgrade in lifestyle. He said, I want it to be operatic in scale. So this is a series of sketches. These are hand-drawn, by the way, hand-drawn, shaded with dry marks, grayscale, scanned in, colorized, and off they go to the director. And then they love it, and they pay me. Even Rosie, the robot maid, remember, redesigned her. And the car, one of the signature, very important plot stuff things in the show. These are different variations. And this is what we ended up with as the final, because this was a prop. Real actors had to climb in and out of this thing. It was round, so all the panels could just rotate and slide around over each other. So it was never made.